The air in the subterranean biolab, designated Q4, carried the sterile metallic tang of filtered oxygen and the sharp scent of ozone from the air scrubbers. It was a Class 4 biosafety facility buried 3 stories beneath the Caesarea Moran military-industrial complex, a sprawling, anonymous installation in the Israeli coastal plain that officially did not exist on any public map. No report. Arnon, chief of Caesarea's biochemical division, stared at the object resting on the grade 316L stainless steel workbench, his own controlled breath fogging the upper edge of his Boss 100 respirator mask. Before him lay a book. To a layperson, or even a seasoned antiquarian, it was an immaculate example of a late 16th century manuscript, its cordovan leather binding authentically cracked and weathered, the vellum pages possessing the specific yellowed patina of 4 centuries of oxidation. It smelled faintly of dust, lignin decay, and time. But Arnon knew its true age was less than 3 months. It was a masterpiece of forensic forgery, the culmination of 1,000 hours of work by the agency's most obsessive artisans. And he, in the next 10 minutes, was tasked with transforming this work of art into one of the most sophisticated assassination devices ever conceived by a nation-state. He checked the cesium-based atomic chronometer on the wall. 02:13:47 a.m. The final, irreversible phase of Operation Scribe was balanced on a razor's edge. His gloved hand, sheathed in 2 layers of nitrile, was preternaturally steady despite the hour and the immense pressure. He picked up a micro-applicator, a custom-milled titanium instrument that resembled a neurosurgeon's tool more than a technician's. A single, hair-thin borosilicate needle extended from its tip, its aperture measuring less than 50 microns. Attached to the applicator was a miniature, shielded vial containing a clear, viscous liquid. It was BTXA, but not the commercial variant used in medicine. This was a recombinant, hyper-purified strain developed in-house under the codename Project Chimera. Its official designation was botulinum toxin type A7 recombinant. Standard botulinum toxin is the deadliest substance known to man. Chimera was engineered to be 10 times more potent and optimized for transdermal absorption. A single microgram, a speck invisible to the naked eye, was sufficient to induce flaccid paralysis of the diaphragm and intercostal muscles, leading to respiratory failure within 3 to 5 hours. Arnon's task was to apply an infinitesimally thin, transparent layer of this toxin onto a predetermined point on a specific page. Page 117. The page was not random. It contained a particularly grandiose passage detailing the direct ideological lineage of the ruler to the ancient kings of Babylon. It was a page their target, a man of monumental ego and professed historical scholarship, was psychologically guaranteed not just to read, but to touch, to trace the calligraphy with his finger. The chimera toxin was engineered with a crucial feature. It was suspended in a volatile, non-aqueous solvent that rendered it inert when dry. The moment it came into contact with the slightest moisture, saliva from a licked fingertip used to turn a page, the protein would refold into its active state and absorb through the epidermis. It was a silent, untraceable death warrant, designed to mimic a massive, sudden stroke or heart attack. The room's environmental controls hummed at a low frequency, maintaining the temperature at a precise 1.8 degrees Celsius and the humidity at less than 12%. Any warmer, and the complex protein structure of the toxin would begin to denature. Any more humid, and it could prematurely activate. Arnon leaned forward, his eyes fixed on the target area through a stereoscopic magnifying lens that projected a targeting reticle onto the vellum. The needle descended, hovering a millimeter above the page, its movement controlled by a pneumatic actuator to eliminate human tremor. He exhaled slowly, his index finger tightening on the applicator's trigger. At that exact moment, a single recessed red LED pulsed on the hermetically sealed door to his left. A silent alarm. Not the klaxon of an external intrusion, but something just as disruptive. An unscheduled Level 1 security sweep. Standard randomized procedure for high-value labs. A two-man internal security team would be at his door in under 60 seconds. The protocol was absolute, inviolable. No active biological agents could be present or in application during a security sweep. The book had to be secured in the cryogenic stasis unit, the applicator purged with a decontaminant gas, and all traces of his work erased from the workbench. But the toxin was already primed in the needle, the pneumatic system fully charged. Aborting the application now risked a micro-spatter event, contaminating the instrument, the priceless book, and potentially the entire clean room. A full biodecontamination protocol would set the operation back by weeks. A delay the director of Mossad had made explicitly clear was strategically unacceptable. He had a choice to be made in a 10-second window. Complete the application and risk the security team witnessing the active device. A catastrophic breach of need-to-know protocol. Or abort, purge the system, and potentially compromise the entire project. He glanced at the chronometer. 50 seconds remaining. His eyes darted from the pulsing red light to the needle tip hovering over the ancient-seeming page. The fate of a nation, the life of a dictator, rested on the pressure of his index finger. He chose. The needle touched the page for precisely 0.8 seconds. A faint, almost imperceptible shimmer, no larger than a pinhead, was left behind on the fibers of the vellum. He retracted the applicator, hit the emergency purge button which flooded the system with denaturing, aerosolized peracetic acid, and with a single, fluid motion, slid the book into its lead-lined, argon-filled transport case. He was turning to lock the case into the cryogenic stasis unit when the door hissed open. Two guards in sterile white CBRN coveralls stepped inside, their faces obscured by polarized blast shields. Their eyes, cold and professional, swept the room in a practiced pattern. Arnon stood perfectly still, his heart hammering against his ribs, his face a mask of detached, professional calm. The senior guard looked at the purged applicator, then at Arnon. "Routine check, Doctor. Everything in order?" "Perfectly," Arnon replied, his voice steady. "Just finishing a calibration cycle." The guard nodded, his gaze lingering for a fraction of a second on the transport case before moving on. After 30 seconds of silent inspection, they left, the door hissing shut behind them. The book, now arguably the deadliest object in the Middle East, was hidden in plain sight, its lethal potential unknown to all but a handful of people on the planet. Phase 2, the Foundation, the mission, codenamed Operation Scribe, was born not from a position of strength, but from a place of profound and escalating strategic fear. Its genesis was a series of stark intelligence briefings delivered in the windowless, EMP-shielded command center of Mossad headquarters in Tel Aviv, a room known simply as the Pit. The year was 1989. The 8-year Iran-Iraq war had just ended, and Iraq's leader, Saddam Hussein, was not weakened. He was triumphant, emboldened, and armed to the teeth. He commanded the fourth largest army in the world, a 1 million-man force hardened by years of brutal, attritional combat. And he was turning his strategic gaze south, towards Israel. The man presenting the grim facts was Nahum Admoni, the director of Mossad. Admoni was not a flamboyant field agent of legend. He was a quiet, academic spy master. A veteran of the Haganah's intelligence service, shy, before Israel was even a state. His defining characteristic was a capacity for cold, brutal logic that stripped every problem down to its essential variables. His greatest past success was overseeing the intelligence network that provided the critical, last-minute justification for the 1981 bombing of Iraq's Osirak nuclear reactor. Now, he was telling Prime Minister Yitzhak Shamir that Operation Opera had not been a permanent solution. It had been, in his words, a temporary cauterization of a wound that has now become septic. Satellite imagery, designated file series KH-11-7B, showed frantic 24/7 construction at new sites, Al-Qaim and Al-Furat, facilities buried deep underground and protected by layers of reinforced concrete and sophisticated air defense systems. Defector reports, cross-referenced by 3 separate intelligence agencies and triple-verified by Mossad's own human assets, spoke of a renewed, covert push for a nuclear weapon, this time with a legion of European scientists lured by massive, untraceable paychecks. But the nuclear threat was the long-term problem. The immediate crisis was chemical. A source inside Iraq's Al-Muthanna state establishment for pesticide production, a euphemism for its largest chemical weapons facility, had smuggled out a soil sample concealed within the heel of a shoe. The asset, a brave Iraqi chemical engineer codenamed Jericho, had been cultivated for 2 years. Analysis of the sample by Israeli military intelligence confirmed the mass production of a new, persistent binary form of VX nerve agent, far more stable and lethal than previous iterations. Jericho's last, fragmented burst transmission, sent moments before he was discovered and executed, spoke of successful tests to mount these new chemical warheads on Iraq's indigenously modified, extended-range Al-Hussein Scud missiles that could now reach Tel Aviv, Haifa, and the Dimona nuclear reactor. On April 2, 1989, Saddam gave a speech that was broadcast across the Arab world. He boasted, "By God, we will make the fire eat up half of Israel if it tries to do anything against Iraq." It was not dismissed as empty rhetoric. This was a direct public threat from a man who had already used chemical weapons against Iranian troops and his own Kurdish population in Halabja. The strategic calculus in Tel Aviv shifted overnight. Containment was no longer a viable policy. The crisis escalated, forcing the formation of a small, tightly knit group tasked with providing a solution. At the head of the operational side was the commander of the Caesarea Division, the Mossad's elite Special Operations Unit. His name was a state secret, known only by his code name, Dagan, a former commander in the legendary Sayeret Matkal Special Forces Unit. Dagan was a man who saw the world as a series of physical problems to be solved through force, ingenuity, or deception. He was one of the key planners behind Operation Wrath of God, the campaign to hunt down and eliminate the Black September terrorists responsible for the 1972 Munich Olympics massacre. His specialty was unconventional solutions. When conventional military options were impossible, the Prime Minister called Dagan. The man chosen to lead the mission on the ground was a case officer named Yair. Yair was a Mistaravim, one of Mossad's deep cover agents, a Jew born in Baghdad whose family had fled the Farhud pogrom in the 1940s. He spoke the Iraqi dialect of Arabic without a trace of an accent, understood its cultural nuances, its poetry, its curses. He could navigate the complex tribal and political landscape of Baghdad as if he'd never left. For Yair, the mission was not just professional. It was a deeply personal settling of scores with the regime that had dispossessed his family. His primary skill was not combat, but a preternatural patience. He could spend years building a cover identity, cultivating a single source, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. Flashback. West Beirut, 1982. The height of the Lebanon War. Yair, then known as Khalid, a Jordanian art dealer, sat in a smoke-filled cafe on Rue Hamra, stirring a tiny cup of thick, sweet coffee. His clothes were expensive linen but slightly worn, his beard neatly trimmed, his hands soft, but for the calluses of a man who handled crates. He was listening to the men at the next table, members of a PLO faction, complain about a recent Israeli airstrike. He nodded sympathetically, offering a quiet curse against the Zionists. For 3 months, Khalid had been a fixture in this neighborhood, buying and selling Islamic art, paying his dues in bribes to the local militia commanders, establishing a pattern of harmless, predictable commercial activity. His target was Abu Sharif, a PLO logistics chief whose office was 3 floors above the cafe. Sharif was responsible for smuggling advanced Soviet-made 9K32 Strela 2 manpads into the city. Mossad needed to know the routes, the suppliers, the delivery schedules. An electronic listening device, a TX9 model no larger than a sugar cube, had to be placed inside the base of a heavy brass lamp on Sharif's desk. The opportunity came unexpectedly. An explosion, distant but powerful, rattled the cafe's windows. A runner burst in a few minutes later, shouting that Sharif's prized Mercedes 450 SEL had been damaged by shrapnel. Sharif, a man vain about his possessions to a comical degree, came storming downstairs, cursing loudly. This was the moment Yair had been waiting for. The flicker of chaos he was trained to exploit. He approached Sharif not as an agent, but as a fellow man of taste. "A tragedy, Commander," Yair said in his flawless Arabic, shaking his head. To see such a fine piece of German engineering so abused by these barbarians. He offered to send his own mechanic, a Mossad tech specialist on standby 2 blocks away, to look at the car, no charge, as a gesture of respect. Sharif, distracted by his rage and flattered by the attention, agreed. While the tech team created a diversion with the car, shorting out the electrical system and claiming it was a complex repair, Yair went upstairs with Sharif's aide to appraise an antique rug in the office. Alone for 90 seconds while the aide fetched tea, Yair's movements were a blur of economy. He didn't rush. He moved with the calm deliberation of a man examining a carpet. His hand brushed the lamp, his fingers finding the seam at the base. A quarter twist, a click. The TX9, coated in a non-reflective polymer and held by a powerful neodymium magnet, was seated. He was admiring the Kerman weave of the rug when the aide returned with the tea. The intelligence gathered from that device over the next 2 weeks allowed the Israeli Air Force to intercept 3 missile shipments, a strategic coup that saved dozens of pilot lives. Yair had never fired a shot. He had simply listened, waited, and understood the vanity of his target. This was why Dagan chose him for Operation Scribe. He was a scalpel, not a hammer. The final key player was Dr. Arnon, the chief biochemist in Caesarea's technical division, a place nicknamed the Q Branch by its Anglophile staff. Arnon was a product of the Weizmann Institute of Science, one of the world's leading research centers. His previous landmark achievement was the development of a specialized toxin that could be delivered via a seemingly innocuous aerosol inhaler. Used to eliminate a key Syrian intelligence chief in Geneva 2 years prior. His challenge for Operation Scribe was far more complex. Create a contact poison that was stable, invisible, untraceable, could be applied to delicate paper without damaging it, and would remain dormant for a predictable period. The target of this immense effort was Saddam Hussein himself. Mossad's psychological profile of him, compiled from hundreds of sources including defected aides, foreign diplomats, and even a disgruntled former mistress, was a paradoxical document. It described a man who was pathologically paranoid. He used multiple body doubles. He never slept in the same bed 2 nights in a row. He had a team of food tasters, and even the air in his bunkers was chemically scrubbed and tested before he entered. But the profile, designated Babylon, also identified a critical vulnerability, an Achilles heel born of pure, unadulterated narcissism. Saddam was a voracious reader, a self-proclaimed historian and novelist. He was obsessed with his own legacy, commissioning books and epic poems that linked his lineage back to the Babylonian kings and even the Prophet Muhammad. An intelligence asset, a low-level archivist at the Iraqi National Museum, provided the final, crucial piece of the puzzle in a seemingly trivial report on the president's personal habits. The archivist noted that when Saddam was presented with a new, rare book for his private collection, he had a specific, unvarying ritual. He would dismiss his aides to examine it alone. And as he read, he would habitually wet his right index finger with his tongue to turn the heavy, often stiff pages of ancient manuscripts. This single mundane detail, buried in a mountain of intelligence, sparked the genesis of the mission. A brainstorming session in Admoni's office quickly discarded all other options. Dagan argued forcefully that trying to strike Saddam in public was a fool's errand. "We cannot get to the man," he said, his voice a low growl. "So we must make something get to him. Something he will invite into his own private space, past all his guards." The idea of a poisoned book, initially dismissed as something from a spy novel, quickly became the only viable plan. The operational environment was complicated by more than just the target's paranoia. Baghdad in 1989 was a hornet's nest of competing intelligence services. The CIA, under its own Project Babylon, was desperately trying to map Saddam's WMD programs, running a network of assets that made the Mukhabarat hyper-vigilant. The French DGSE was active, protecting the multi-billion-dollar contracts for Mirage fighters and Exocet missiles, and had no interest in any instability that might jeopardize their payments. The KGB, meanwhile, saw Iraq as its key client state in the Gulf and worked closely with the Mukhabarat, providing training and technology that made deep cover operations exceptionally dangerous. Yair would not be operating in a vacuum. He would be a ghost moving through a crowded room of hunters. Prime Minister Shamir, a man known for his hardline stance and deep suspicion, was briefed. He listened to Admoni's clinical presentation without interruption. At the end, he fixed Admoni with his gaze and asked only one question. "Can you guarantee it will work?" Admoni replied with the stark truth of the intelligence world. "No, Prime Minister, there are no guarantees. But I can guarantee that if we do nothing, those missiles will one day fly. This is not about certainty. It is about probability and necessity." Shamir nodded slowly, his eyes closed for a long moment. "Then do it. Make it happen." Operation Scribe was officially greenlit. The clock started ticking. Phase 3. The core. The first phase of the operation was the meticulous construction of a ghost. Yair needed a new identity, one that was flawless and could withstand the intense, violent scrutiny of the Mukhabarat. The identity chosen was that of Jean-Pierre Ferret, a wealthy, slightly decadent antiquarian book dealer from Geneva. The legend-building department of Mossad, known as Melucha, went to work. They didn't just create a fake passport. They created a verifiable life. They backdated business registrations in the canton of Geneva, fabricated Swiss tax records going back a decade, and created a thick file of correspondence with legitimate auction houses like Sotheby's and Christie's, using insiders at those institutions to insert Ferré's name into old auction logs. They bought a small, struggling publishing house in Paris to serve as a front, printing exquisite, limited-run catalogs of rare Islamic manuscripts under Ferré's name. Yair, meanwhile, spent 6 months in a Mossad safe house in Brussels, living the role. He wasn't just trained, he was remade. He learned the nuances of the rare book trade, the specific jargon used to describe vellum quality, ink composition, and binding techniques. He was tutored by a world-renowned expert on Islamic calligraphy, learning to spot forgeries and identify regional styles at a glance. By the time he was ready, Jean-Pierre Ferré was not just a cover. He was a real person with a verifiable history, a credit rating, and a reputation in a niche community. Insertion could not be a direct flight into Baghdad. That would attract immediate attention. Instead, the plan was a multi-stage infiltration designed to build a plausible travel history. Yair, traveling as Ferré, flew from Geneva to Amman, Jordan. There he spent 2 weeks establishing his presence, making high-profile, legitimate purchases from local art dealers, ensuring his name appeared on shipping manifests and customs forms. From Amman, he didn't fly. He hired a private car to take him overland to the Iraqi border. He used the Treble border crossing, a chaotic, dusty outpost known for its corrupt officials and heavy smuggling traffic. He was just another European businessman looking to acquire Mesopotamian artifacts, willing to pay for the privilege. His luggage contained several rare but legitimate books, and a carefully concealed cash fund of $100,000 for bribes and operational expenses. As planned, the Iraqi border guards were difficult. They held him for 6 hours in a sweltering, fly-blown office, searching his belongings, asking probing, circular questions. Yair, remaining calm and affecting an air of slight arrogance befitting a wealthy European, complained loudly about the delay and eventually paid the necessary facilitation fees. He was waved through. He was inside Iraq. His first destination was a small, unassuming bookshop in the Al-Mutanabi Street Market, the historic center of Baghdad's intellectual and literary life. The shop had been purchased 3 months prior through a series of shell corporations controlled by Mossad. It was to be Yair's base of operations and his public face. The shop gave him a legitimate reason to be in the market, to meet with collectors, curators, and government officials. The real work, however, happened in the soundproofed basement. Before Yair's arrival, a separate Mossad technical team, operating under the diplomatic cover of a friendly embassy, had already swept the building for bugs and installed their equipment. The key piece of technology was a short-range, encrypted, burst transmission radio, codenamed Sparrow. The Sparrow's signal was designed using frequency-hopping spread spectrum technology, making it indistinguishable from background radio noise, and could only transmit for 1.2 seconds at a time to evade Iraqi SIGINT direction-finding teams. It was linked to a Mossad signals intelligence station in a covert location across the border. Communication was slow, deliberate, and dangerous. For the next 8 months, Yair worked. His primary objective was twofold. First, to identify the precise channel through which a gift could reach Saddam. Second, and just as critical, was to get independent, undeniable confirmation of the finger-licking habit. Dagan, a man who trusted nothing he couldn't see or verify himself, refused to risk a multi-million-dollar operation on a single-source intelligence report from an archivist. He wanted video. This led to a dangerous sub-operation. Yair identified a potential asset, a middle-aged cleaner named Faisal, who worked in the Republican Palace complex and whose route included the outer offices of Saddam's private library. Faisal was a ghost, invisible to the powerful men he cleaned up after. But he had a vulnerability. His daughter Layla had a rare blood disorder requiring monthly infusions of a specific immunoglobulin, a medicine unavailable in Iraq due to sanctions and impossible to afford on a cleaner's salary. Yair, through a cutout an Iraqi doctor blackmailed into service years earlier, arranged for the medicine to be anonymously supplied. After 3 months of this silent generosity, the doctor made contact, explaining the medicine came from a foreign benefactor who now needed a small favor in return. Faisal, trapped between gratitude for his daughter's life and terror of the Mukhabarat, agreed. The favor was to place a device, disguised as an electrical power adapter, in a specific wall socket behind a curtain. The device was a marvel of miniaturization. A motion-activated micro-camera with a pinhole lens and a low-power, short-range transmitter. The plan was for Faisal to plant it during his cleaning shift. Yair, parked in a baker's van 2 kilometers away, would record the encrypted feed. The operation almost ended in disaster. Halfway through Faisal's shift, an unscheduled security drill was called by Qusay Hussein, the president's son, known for his sadistic and unpredictable nature. The entire wing was locked down. Faisal, with the device still in his pocket, was trapped in a utility closet, listening as Republican Guard soldiers and their Belgian Malinois dogs swept the corridor outside. For 2 terrifying hours, he remained hidden, praying to God, his sweat soaking through his uniform. Yair, monitoring the chaos on a radio scanner, prepared to scrub the mission, burn the cutout doctor, and activate Faisal's exfiltration plan. But the drill ended, the lockdown was lifted, and Faisal, his nerves shredded, completed the task. 2 nights later, Yair got what Dagan wanted. The camera, activated by movement as Saddam entered the library, captured 12 minutes of grainy but clear footage. It showed the dictator settling into a large leather chair with an old Quran. And then, plainly visible, the ritual. He raised his right hand, touched his index finger to his tongue, and turned a page. He did it 3 more times. Yair transmitted a single, compressed frame of the video via the Sparrow. The confirmation was absolute. The mission was a go. But technology, especially cutting-edge technology deployed in hostile territory, is a fickle ally. A week later, the Sparrow failed. Yair went to send his routine status check, a simple 2-character coded burst, and the transmit light on the unit remained dark. He ran the internal diagnostic. The result was a cryptic error code. Air frec synth fail. The frequency synthesizer, the heart of the frequency hopping system, was dead. He was blind and deaf, completely cut off from Tel Aviv. In the pit, the silence was deafening. Yair had missed 2 consecutive communication windows. Dagan, pacing like a caged wolf, assumed the worst. He's been taken. The shop is blown. We need to activate the emergency protocols. No, Admoni countered, his voice calm but firm. Yair is too disciplined. If he were compromised, he would have activated his distress signal. This is a technical failure. He summoned Avi, the 24-year-old electronics prodigy from Unit 8200 who had designed the Sparrow's core circuitry. Avi, pale and sleep-deprived, was rushed into the pit. He looked at the error code Yair had managed to send before the unit went completely dark. The synthesizer chip, Avi said, his voice barely a whisper. It must be a thermal fracture in one of the solder joints. The temperature fluctuations in that basement. It's the only explanation. Can you talk him through a repair? Dagan demanded. Talk him through a surface mount micro-soldering repair, remotely, with no tools? It's impossible, Avi stammered. The alternative is we lose our best agent and a 2-year operation, Dagan growled. Make it possible. For the next 10 hours, a desperate plan was hatched. They couldn't send a new radio. Instead, they used a commercial shortwave radio station in a neighboring country, one they secretly controlled. At a prearranged time, they broadcast a series of coded numbers hidden within a seemingly normal music program. It was a one-way message, slow and agonizingly complex. Yair, listening on a small receiver, scribbled down the numbers. They were instructions. The instructions led him to a specific stall in the Shorja market. Taped to the underside of a copper pot was a small package containing a new synthesizer chip, a tube of silver epoxy, and a miniature, battery-powered soldering iron. The next phase of the instructions, broadcast the following night, was Avi's remote repair guide. For 6 hours, in the silent basement, Yair worked, his large hands surprisingly deft. Avi's voice, pre-recorded and embedded in the musical broadcast, was his only guide. Okay, Yair. Locate capacitor C47. You need to use the tip of your knife to gently pry the old chip off the board. Be careful not to lift.